Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes' Illuminati, the man who rules the world, takes on the head of the global elite in this all-new action-packed John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' Illuminati in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. New York Governor Kathy Hochul has put a plan to implement congestion pricing in New York City on hold indefinitely.
Tonight, after all the controversy and all the lawsuits and all the arguments and all the anger over a $15 fare for driving below 60th Street in Manhattan, congestion pricing in New York City is now on hold indefinitely. So what happens next? And what happens to the MTA's plan of bringing in $1 billion of extra revenue a year? We begin our coverage tonight with Eyewitness News reporter Jim Dolan.
Bumper to bumper and temper to temper, they sat on 9th Avenue tonight, as they always do, with nowhere to go. At subway stops, they waited, it seemed, forever for trains that would not come. Congestion pricing was going to help improve service and ease the traffic. Not anymore.
I have come to the difficult decision that implementing the planned congestion pricing system risks too many unintended consequences for New Yorkers at this time. For that reason, I have directed the MTA to indefinitely pause the program.
In a stunning reversal, New York Governor Kathy Hochul today put the hot-button issue of congestion pricing, a $15 toll to drive below 60th Street in Manhattan, on hold. Choking off $1 billion a year in revenue for mass transit. Hochul has supported the plan for years.
Keep your promise! Keep your promise!
Supporters felt betrayed.
I'm annoyed. I think it should start right away. As a driver, I agree to accept it because it's important to get public transportation funded.
Governor Hochul has supported this all along, and at the nth hour has denied New York City the right to cleaner air, better subways.
But most drivers were relieved that a plan that could have cost them nearly $4,000 a year had been postponed, maybe forever.
I'm glad that it's gone. I'm a fairly new driver in the city, but knowing that that's not part of the problem, then I'll take it.
Some say the governor is caving to special interests and wealthy voters she needs politically, but she says the move is intended to shore up a still ailing New York City economy.
In this moment of financial stress, high inflation, and already the high cost of living for so many New Yorkers, my focus must be on putting more money back in people's pockets.
And the mayor agrees.
We have to get it right. We have to make sure that it's not a dual burden on everyday New Yorkers.
The plan would have funneled billions of dollars to provide a modern switching system that would allow more trains to travel closer together on the subways. More stations could be made accessible for the disabled. And the plan would have funded an extension of the 2nd Avenue subway.
Where is that money going to come from if we don't get congestion pricing?
Congestion pricing has been in the planning stages for New York City for 16 years. $500 million in taxpayer money has been spent in planning and infrastructure, all of it assuming that Governor Hochul was in favor of it. And she was. But commuters who drive into the city were angry, and polls showed that Governor Hochul's popularity was dwindling, and today she reversed course.
Now, most people in the city of New York and the state of New York were shocked, in addition to people in the tri-state area, such as New Jersey and Connecticut and even the state of Pennsylvania, when New York Governor Kathy Hochul decided to put the brakes on the congestion pricing program that would charge drivers outside of New York $15 for entering what they called congestion zone that was below 60th Street. Now, this original plan, which was proposed by Mike Bloomberg over 15 years ago, was supposed to mirror the model of congestion pricing that was implemented in London in the early 2000s, that was supposed to be able to allegedly save the environment by discouraging individuals from driving their cars into downtown London and motivate people to go and take mass transit. And all of the money for congestion pricing was supposed to be used to be able to invest in the subways the same way it was used to invest in the tubes that are in London. That was the original plan for congestion pricing way back when New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg made the proposal for congestion pricing. And as this whole proposal went through an entire bureaucratic process, first with the federal government to sign off on it as related to implementing this congestion pricing, and then going through the state legislature, and then through the MTA, Board of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, this whole plan to implement congestion pricing was supposed to go into effect on June 30th, and many drivers who were looking to do business in New York were dreading this charge, and many were starting to make plans to take alternatives as related to avoiding the entire issue of congestion pricing. Now, all of those plans have basically been put on hold, and many drivers who do business in New York are having a sigh of relief, and they're having a sigh of relief because they have been given a temporary reprieve from having to pay this $15 a day to drive into New York City below 60th Street or drive into New Manhattan through the Holland Tunnel. And those charges basically would have, as I see it, destroyed New York's economy, because most New Yorkers basically would have been squeezed by not only the tolls outside of the city as related to the bridges and tunnels, but the congestion pricing would have compounded this as well. Now, New York Governor Kathy Hochul says that her two reasons for postponing congestion pricing had to do, one, with New York City's economy not recovering from the pandemic, and the other was because the New York State was dealing with several political races as related to the 2024 congressional elections. Now, when it comes to those 2024 congressional elections, many in the Red Party were looking to use the congestion pricing as a reason to run against the blue candidates, and showing how the blue candidates were disconnected and detached from many of the upstate New Yorkers and people outside of the city who would have suffered as related to the higher cost of looking to enter the city every day in order to go to work. And in addition to those people, you had people in the state of New Jersey. You had Governor Phil Murphy looking to file a lawsuit as related to congestion pricing, saying that it was unfairly taxing people from New Jersey for looking to come into New York through the Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel, and many of the other bridges. And this was a lawsuit filed by New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, and was also filed by several other congressmen from New Jersey who felt that this congestion pricing plan was nothing more than a tax grab. Now, those politicians basically saw how this whole policy was going to hurt their constituents, and this is why they filed lawsuits to stop congestion pricing. And you also had many other people in New York City who also had an issue with congestion pricing as well. You had many business owners who felt that congestion pricing was going to cost them a lot of business, because oftentimes on the weekends, what you have are people coming into New York City from New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and even as far as Boston and Rhode Island. And all those people who would come to New York would basically be charged this fee, and them being charged this fee would really hurt many of these businesses who make their money from local travelers who go and travel on these roads here in New York, they would have basically felt the brunt of this as related to congestion pricing, and it may have been the thing that would have priced out a lot of people in the city and the country who wanted to travel by using their cars. And this is one of the reasons why New York Governor Kathy Hochul had to put the brakes on congestion pricing, because it would have really done some serious damage to New York's travel and tourism industry, and it would have done such serious damage because it would have really made it where most people wouldn't have had an incentive to come into the city. That would have been the big reason for, again, ending this congestion pricing before it even started. And the other reason would be the numerous legal challenges that this law would get, because with this whole congestion pricing policy, basically, as I see it, really ran against our federal interstate and commerce laws. I mean, this whole congestion pricing law, as I see it, basically violates that federal law, and this whole policy would have been thrown out in the Supreme Court had it been implemented, because you don't have congestion pricing in other parts of the country, and you don't have it because, again, here in the United States, we have interstate travel and commerce laws as related to federal interstate lines, and those interstate lines, again, are a part of the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. You can't have a local jurisdiction going out here and telling people they can't travel on roads and be forced to pay this kind of congestion pricing fee. That's what we have in our Constitution as related to making sure that we could have interstate travel and commerce, and that's the kind of lawsuit that many businesses could file a lawsuit on, because if you have to travel to New Jersey to do business in New York, and you're forced to pay this fee that you're not made to pay in any other part of the tri-state area, this could be a reason, again, for getting this law thrown out in court. And that is another part of the whole process as related to why this congestion pricing plan was just an unmitigated disaster. Now, this congestion pricing program, as it was presented by Kathy Hochul, she believes that she needs to stop this right now, because she knows that the Blue Party isn't doing well politically, and it's not doing well politically because of the state of the economy. Now, the state of the economy is very fragile, with most Americans in the country struggling to make ends meet, and putting a new $15 fee on people who are already struggling would make sure that these people would be alienated, and when they went to the polls on November 5th, it would make them motivated to vote red, and that could spell some doom for Kathy Hochul in 2026, after she barely wound up winning the 2022 election against Lee Zeldin. Now, Lee Zeldin almost won the office of governor back in 2022, and Kathy Hochul only got it by only 6 percentage points. So having this congestion pricing program in place would have basically damaged her as related to her poll numbers, which were already low, because Kathy Hochul's approval rating is at an all-time low at this point. And with her approval rating at an all-time low, what she is afraid of is that if she implements congestion pricing, it could further alienate the entire upstate New York base, and further wind up alienating most of the New York City base, because it was New York City that was the reason why Kathy Hochul got a second term. And if they implemented congestion pricing and she alienated most of the business owners, then it would ensure that she would possibly lose in 2026. And that's the political reason why Kathy Hochul went out and decided to postpone congestion pricing indefinitely, because as the head of the MTA, it is her authority to say what goes on with the MTA. And this whole situation has me wondering what happened to Janno Lieber, the CEO of the MTA, who was all for congestion pricing, him being from the UK where congestion pricing was put in place. I mean, this whole situation, I have to wonder what happened to him, because he clearly was emasculated in this situation, as his leadership basically was undermined by the governor abruptly going and canceling congestion pricing, a congestion pricing program that again was supposed to go in place on June 30th, and would have, if it was put in place, would have done devastating damage to New York's economy. Now, when it comes to New York's economy, yes, it has suffered greatly as related to the pandemic, and many of the businesses that were forced to close as related to the COVID lockdowns, when they reopened, they started having fiscal issues because they weren't able to get loans due to the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, and they weren't able to regain the traction because many of them were struggling with bills. And as a result, many areas of Manhattan looked like a ghost town with businesses going out of business, and congestion pricing possibly would have exacerbated that situation by de-incentivizing people from wanting to come to the city. Because when it comes to New York on the weekends, usually that's when a lot of small businesses and larger businesses like retail make most of their money from people coming into the city. And if there's a congestion pricing policy in place, what that does is it makes it where people are not motivated to come into the city, especially if they have to pay a $10 or $15 toll to come in through the Lincoln or Holland Tunnel or across the bridges like the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. They've already got to pay a fee for a toll, and now they have to pay another fee for congestion pricing. So that's basically like $30 to $45, almost $50 before you can even come into the city below 60th Street. And even worse, what would happen is instead of the congestion coming into Manhattan, what you would have is congestion coming onto side roads, and as people look for alternatives to avoid the congestion area and avoid the fees, and that would cause further congestion on roadways like the FDR Drive and other drives as related to local areas outside of New York. So the congestion pricing program would have done serious damage to New York's economy because it would have driven traffic out of New York City and de-incentivized people from wanting to come into New York, especially on the weekends, to go see things like shows, go see things like movies, or even just go out and see sights. It would have de-incentivized people who drove their vehicles into New York, and it would have led to people basically adapting their behavior. And that's the thing that I really believe terrified Kathy Hochul as related to the damage she would have been accountable for damaging New York's economy. Because once you would have charged that fee below 60th Street, what would have happened is that you would have had people looking to adapt their behavior. And as they adapted their behavior, instead of those people driving into the city to go to restaurants, shops, and travel, what they would do is go and stay in their local areas like New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and even Rhode Island and Boston. And what those people would do is start going to local restaurants and spending their money locally. Moreover, what you would have is you would have people who planned events like Comic-Cons and concerts. They would start having no incentive to bring events to New York City. No, what they would do is adapt and start going to have these events at local locations in places like New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, upstate New York, and other areas, because it would be a lot cheaper for their customers to come to those locations because there's no congestion pricing in place. And with there being no congestion pricing in place, these areas would basically start getting more people to come to these local areas, to these local events, and that would take lots of money out of New York City, which is still reeling from these COVID-19 lockdowns and vaccine mandates that were implemented by Mayor Eric Adams. Again, these policies basically deterred people from looking to do business in New York. and looked to deter people from doing business here in New York, because those policies basically alienated people, and that's why we have whole swaths of downtown Manhattan and lower Manhattan that have for rent signs, and that whole situation would get progressively worse, and that's what possibly scared Kathy Hochul into looking to postpone congestion pricing, a policy that should have never been put in place, because it was the idea of an ideologue in Michael Bloomberg, who basically wanted to try to copy a business model from London, an economy that's completely different than America's, and would have done just devastating damage to New York's economy, which is still reeling from the bad policies like vaccine mandates. And this whole thing would have done, again, devastating damage to New York's economy, because it would have driven business straight out of New York and already hurt a reeling economy that still has not recovered because New York City's taxes are the highest in the nation. It's almost impossible to do business with all of the bureaucracy, and a congestion pricing fee would further discourage people from coming into a city that's already plagued with being dirty and filled with crime from individuals who, again, are out here due to bail reform, another failed policy, and this congestion pricing fee compounded on the high crime areas, would have again basically made it where New York City would have turned into a ghost town instead of a tourist attraction. And what's really sad is that in the 30 years since Rudy Giuliani cleaned up New York City and made it into a place where people wanted to come, we've had politicians like Michael Bloomberg and Bill de Blasio and Eric Adams and Kathy Hochul go out here and not think about how to improve the quality of life. No, they've basically turned New York City back into a hellhole, and the whole idea of having people pay to go to a hellhole, that would have basically turned many people off as related to, again, not only the economy, as related to travel and tourism, but it also would have made it where many people wouldn't have even thought about investing in New York City and not thought about investing in New York City, because all of these, again, taxes and fees, and on top of it, congestion pricing, would have ensured nobody would have wanted to come to New York. And a lot of people aren't coming to New York. In fact, you have people moving out of New York City because of the high prices, and congestion pricing would have even moved out more New Yorkers. It would have moved more New Yorkers out of the city, because again, this congestion pricing would have even affected New York residents who wanted to drive below 60th Street, and again, would have alienated those New Yorkers and made it where people just said, forget it, it's just too expensive here, and it's already too expensive, and people are struggling, and that struggling as related to living to paycheck, and then having another congestion pricing fee put on you, that would have led to a lot of New Yorkers looking to vote red for the first time, because this policy, again, had people seeing red as related to their bills, and had them seeing red because they basically were going to have to eat these costs on top of more costs. And that's the reason why Kathy Hochul basically had to pull the plug on congestion pricing, a proposal that definitely was just, again, a stupid proposal from Michael Bloomberg way back in the mid-2000s when New York was doing well. I mean, yeah, New York economy was doing well at that time, and in his ideals, Michael Bloomberg thought, oh, we could charge people like in London, again, not understanding that London's economy is completely different. London's economic system is different, and with New York City's economy being a part of a capitalist system, this was not going to be seen something as positive. No, we don't really go for cash grabs from government offices here in America. And this whole policy basically stunk to high heaven, and most New Yorkers weren't with it. And if Kathy Hochul were to have approved it and went along with it, it basically would have led to her end on Election Day in 2026. This, compounded again with her low poll numbers, basically would have led to her end, and that's why she possibly postponed this congestion pricing. Now, it'll be seen if what she'll do, as related to congestion pricing is try to bring it back later on. But to bring it back later on would be political suicide, I believe. And when it came to congestion pricing, this was a proposal that should have died. Unfortunately, because we have a blue majority here in New York, this proposal was allowed to go on. And even worse, we spent billions of dollars putting in infrastructure for a congestion pricing program that basically would have choked the life out of New York City, and just shows how fiscally irresponsible having just the blue party in charge as a majority here in New York is, and how we really need a check to balance the blue party as related to many of their failed policies and proposals. Failed policies like bail reform, failed policies like the policy as related to going out here and making plastic bags illegal, failed policies as related to looking to so-called save the environment, but making the environment even worse for most New Yorkers as related to this plan that was supposed to speculatively bring in $15 billion to the state of New York as related to fixing and maintaining its infrastructure for the MTA. But that whole plan, again, was just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, yeah, we have this proposal to say we're going to fix up the subway similar to what was done in the tubes in London. But the whole thing is that you're making everybody outside of New York pay for fixing up the MTA instead of holding the MTA accountable for most of the overruns and things going over budget. If any organization did need its accounting checked, it's the MTA, which basically just spends money like water. And really, we need something to, again, check that out as related to dealing with their accounting. Now, when it comes to this congestion pricing program, it really is a major hit to most everyday New Yorkers, similar to what we had with the commuter tax here in New York. Now, anyone who lived in New York in the 70s and the 80s, you knew that there was a commuter tax for people who were outside of New York and lived outside of New York. They were charged a commuter tax. However, that commuter tax basically was ended, I think, in the 90s because it was just costing people outside of New York too much money. And you would think that Kathy Hochul would propose a commuter tax with a $4 billion deficit, but she knows that that would be political suicide, so she possibly went along with this congestion pricing scheme, seeing where it was going to go. But when the numbers started to get bad for her at the polls, that's when she decided to pull the plug on congestion pricing. And congestion pricing in and of itself, again, would have led to the choking of life out of quality of life here in New York out. It would have choked the life out of New York City's economy. And this whole plan for congestion pricing was, again, an unmitigated disaster proposed by Michael Bloomberg, an unmitigated disaster, but it still managed to go on. And what's really sad is that we spent all this money on all of this infrastructure, and again, all of that money wasted on a plan that would have destroyed New York's economy, destroyed because many of our politicians really are inept and incompetent, and really don't see the damage that they do to our economy with their crazy proposals, because any plan to, again, propose to deter people from using vehicles when vehicles are a part of commerce is just completely dumb. I mean, when I think about this congestion pricing, it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, because you need trucks to bring in items as related to deliveries. You need trucks and cars to come into the city so workers can come in outside of the city. And you need vehicles to be able to go and be on the streets. And that's where everybody got it all twisted. That's where people like Michael Bloomberg got it twisted, by taking many of our streets and side streets and turning them into bike lanes and turning them into pedestrian plazas. I mean, you need streets for commerce to be able to commence, and you need streets so that people can be able to deliver products. I mean, this is all about business in the city, and we've impeded our business by trying to follow Michael Bloomberg's plan to go green. And as we looked to go green, we were driving the city into red because it wasn't bringing money into the city, and congestion pricing would have taken so much money out of the city that it would have led to the city winding up being as bankrupt as it was in the 1970s. And sadly, nobody had the vision to see where they were going. Now, I could see where they were going sitting here in the South Bronx, living in the city for 50 years. I could see where congestion pricing would have taken the entire life out of the city, because if you discourage people from driving into the city, you discourage people from doing business in the city. And if you discourage people from doing business in the city, you basically cut off all your tax revenue as related to business in the city. And as you cut off your tax revenue, you also cut off your external revenue that you would have gotten from outside states, because people do drive into the city and to see the city, and again would have lost all of that revenue, billions of dollars. Yeah, you would have gotten 15 billion for the MTA, but you would have lost hundreds of billions of dollars long term. And it just shows what happens when you have people who are only thinking one way, thinking only about social justice, but not thinking about actual commerce that keeps the country going. This is what happens when you have people short-term thinking instead of long-term thinking, because congestion pricing, yeah, it was a nice idea in London, but it's not even working there. You have more people driving into London than they did before, and you still have fiscal issues in London. But here in New York, it would have been a completely different thing, because again, our economy runs different. And with New York already hemorrhaging businesses and hemorrhaging people, our economy couldn't recover from the bad policies presented in COVID by Bill de Blasio as related to his vaccine mandate and other policies that basically choked the life out of the city, like bail reform. The congestion pricing would have further compounded those issues and made New York into a city that wouldn't be able to even sustain its own ability to make revenue. I mean, congestion pricing would have killed the city deader than disco, and basically would have led to the city falling completely apart and in a worse place than it was in the 70s and the 80s. Now, I know I'm repeating some of these talking points, but I want people to understand the gravity of this situation and how devastating it would be to New Yorkers. I mean, congestion pricing would have made the quality of life here in New York City a living hell, and it would have basically, again, made it so miserable that it basically would have led to the whole majority of the Blue Party imploding. It may implode anyway, because they're the ones who implement these stupid policies. And again, congestion pricing was one of the worst ideas to ever come from Michael Bloomberg, and one of the worst ideas to go through New York's whole political system. It's a bad idea and bad for business. Now, some of these elites will sit there and think they can have a playground below 60th Street where they're going to have it like Dubai. But what they don't understand is that Dubai is a monarchy, and the United States is a country that is a republic. And as a republic, you need people to pay taxes, you need people to be residences, you need people to have businesses, and you need revenue coming in order to balance a fiscal budget. You need people to have incentive to come in, and congestion pricing doesn't give people that incentive to come into the big apple, an apple that has been rotted by Blue Party policies that really don't think about the bigger picture of business here in the city. Now, if you want to support my Black-owned business, the SJS Direct imprint, you can pick up my books on the SJS Direct imprint, such as the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my Black sorority novel, The Thetas, and my vampire novel, Eternal Night. You can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find all of those books at big box retailers like Walmart, Target, and other online booksellers all across the globe by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to see me make more videos about New York City and life in New York City, you can drop a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App so that I can stay on the air, continuing to make content about life in the city. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Amari's Revenge. The goddess next door is confronted by a Nubian queen out for revenge at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in this inaugural Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Amari's Revenge in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.